Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was a genius, but what did his life truly look like? Because it isn't as glamorous as you might expect. Mozart spent most of his career trying to make a living in a system where composers were treated more like servants than superstars. And the gap between his talent and his bank account was one of the great jokes of 18th century Europe. So let's take it back. Mozart was born in Salzburg in 1756. People called him a prodigy, but to be honest, that kind of undersells him. Because by the age of 6, he could improvise, compose, and outperform musicians who had been training for decades. I mean, I started playing piano at 7, and 10 years later it felt like I had 2 mallets for hands. But anyway, I digress. His father Leopold took him and his sister Nannerl on tour around the courts of Europe. They played for nobles and royals and basically anyone who could afford to pay them. It was impressive, but it also meant Mozart grew up more as a traveling act than a child. And then the trouble came when he became an adult because, of course, that novelty wears off. And we see this with many child stars today. Europe at the time loved the prodigy, but it wasn't quite as enthusiastic about the grown man looking for a bit of steady work. We tried holding a court position in Salzburg, but he hated the restrictions and left for Vienna, where he attempted something unusual for the time, which was working as a freelance composer. This meant he had pupils, one-off commissions, concerts, and a pretty constant pressure to survive. Some months he would do well, performing for packed houses, and other months he was borrowing money, juggling debts, and hoping his next opera would be the next big hit. Vienna's musical world was overcrowded and highly competitive, and musicians relied on aristocratic favor a lot of the time, which could disappear overnight. And despite all this, this is where he produced his best work. The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, the great piano concertos, the clarinet concerto, and the chamber pieces people still study today, and that I hated playing growing up, but can appreciate now. He wrote at a ferocious pace other composers just couldn't keep up with, partly because he needed the income and partly because his mind just didn't seem to switch off. However, he fell into ill health in 1791 while he was finishing the Magic Flute and working on the Requiem. Contemporary medical accounts point to a natural illness, possibly a severe infection. He was just 35 years old when he died. And again, contrary to popular belief, he wasn't a man in disgrace, but he was one who worked himself to the edge, and he left behind a body of music you could argue almost nobody has matched since. If there's anything we can take from Mozart's life, is that genius doesn't guarantee anybody any true success. I guess it depends on what you mean by success. I mean, posthumously, very successful. While he lived, not quite so much. In any case, he seemed like a man who spent most of his life racing to keep up with his own talent. And perhaps such a talent is a blessing and a curse.